What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamota and Danny Abdeljabbar. What's up, Danny? How are you?
Good, man. Chilling, as per usual. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty well. I can't really complain. Hoping to... I guess we're going to be talking about a topic that is not really that fun to talk about, or it's kind of depressing to do research and to follow the story in general. So I guess we should just jump right into it and kind of skip over the pleasantries.
Sure.
But we're going to be doing another episode on Yemen. We haven't talked about the war on Yemen for a while now, but for those of you who have been listening to our show for a long time now, we've been on for about 2 years doing this. About a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago, probably about a year and a half ago, 18 months ago, we started doing episodes on the war on Yemen, and a lot of people didn't really know anything about it. So we were happy to continue doing it. We followed some of the Yemeni Civil War, following the Houthis, along with Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and the Saudi blockade. And I think we did a pretty good job of covering, creating awareness on the conflict, as well as covering the DC politics. And now that we have a administration change in the White House, and I guess we've been doing podcasts on ancient history over the past 6 weeks at this point,
yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
We want to kind of do our first episode in more of a that reflects more modern things that are going on right now. So why not talk about the war on Yemen? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's totally a good time for us to talk about this with the shift in power in the U.S. But also it coincides and lines up pretty well with the day of global action on the Yemen war, which was just this past 2 days ago on January 25th, which we will discuss very briefly at the end. But those two things combined, I think, makes this a good topic for us to bring up, and hopefully we get some new insight and we can draw some new ideas from it. I know I personally also wanted to include some things that we learned here on the show, back in November, when we had a guest on, Christian Sorensen, who came and spoke about the military-industrial complex. And I think now, after having, that new knowledge and learning all about the MIC, coupled with, the current ongoings in the war in Yemen, I think it's a good time for us to make those comparisons, and just kind of have a dialogue about what we can do, if anything at all, and what to watch out for in the coming months and years.
Yeah, and the goal of this episode is to explain more so the origins of the war. I'm probably going to focus more on the origins of the war, and Danny and I will then focus on more so the modern context and what the current politics of the war. So I guess I'll just start with the basic geography. Yemen is a country. Yemen is a country.
Yemen is a country.
Yemen is a country. We know. Yemen is located on the southern end of the Arabian Peninsula, and it's bordered with Saudi Arabia to the north. You have Oman to the east, you have the Red Sea to the west of it, and you have the Gulf of Aden to the south. So it's important to understand the geography of Yemen, to get a sense of what the conflict actually is. So mainland Yemen and the Horn of Africa is separated.
So Somalia
by only a 16-mile
places like that, yeah.
Only a 16-mile wide strait. So it's shorter than the English Channel, which makes it a transit spot from Africa to Asia. And the strait, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, is an extremely important shipping choking point. So most exports of petroleum and natural gas from the Persian Gulf that transit the Suez Canal pass through two very important shipping choking points. So you have the Bab el Mandeb Strait, which is on the west of Yemen, like the western peninsula, and then you have the Strait of Hormuz, which is on the east of the Arabian Peninsula. So the vast majority of oil fields and petroleum refineries in the Arabian Peninsula, they're all located on the east, within about 50 miles of the eastern coast of Saudi Arabia. In addition, the majority of the deep water shipping ports, they're all located on the east coast as well. So you have, in order to ship large oil tankers, you can't do that off the Red Sea. You have to do it out of the Strait of Hormuz, which creates a really crowded highway of ship transit because there's multiple oil exporters, and there's also imports coming in, and then there's also a bunch of navies patrolling that as well, including the Iran and the United States. So it gets for an awful kind of a sticky situation sometimes. Would you agree?
Yep. Yeah, totally. And also just to add to that, in the Bab el Mandeb, there's also a lot of just other shipping going on, not just oil.
Yeah, there's other things that are shipped there as well besides oil. I mean, there's other things that go into that country. Most of the countries in the Middle East, they do import a lot of goods. Now, Yemen is a low-income country. In fact, it's the poorest country in the Middle East and among the least developed countries in the world. Severe droughts have ravaged their agriculture sector over the past decade, and coffee production, which was their principal form of foreign exchange, has been steadily declining over the past 40 years. A large percentage of their GDP was due to Yemenis working at Saudi oil fields, who would then send back money to their families. So it'd be like, an illegal coming from Mexico to the United States. They have a job and they ship money to their family over a course of 5 years, and then they go back. However, what happened is that Saudi Arabia, they expelled almost 1 million Yemeni workers after Yemen supported Saddam Hussein during the Gulf War. So they lost a lot of that income. And then throughout the 90s, Yemen was basically going through a on and off again tribal civil warfare, which really drained their economy. And as a consequence, for the past 24 years, Yemen has relied almost solely on foreign aid and IMF loans. Because of the current Saudi blockade, all of Yemen's exports have been halted, which is about 92% petroleum and 8% agriculture. So they do have a petroleum sector as well that dominates their economy, and they have some agriculture. Most, undeveloped countries, they kind of depend on those commodities to and just ship out raw goods. So Yemen is not an exception there. But the thing is, they're suffering severe inflation. Yemen's central bank's foreign reserves, which stood at roughly $5.2 billion prior to the war that broke out in 2015, they have been completely wiped out. And there's a social welfare fund, which is a cash transfer program for people in extreme poverty. That's been cashed out since 2014. And because of their lack of dollars, they can't support food imports or any critical goods such as just basic over-the-counter medicine. So we're talking about like penicillin, Benadryl, just like really common things that you can go to a local CVS or to buy when you're under the weather or to fight some type of bacterial infection, something pretty basic. We're not talking about like getting the cure for AIDS here, you know what I mean? So this has turned into the world's largest humanitarian crisis. Right now, there are nearly 1 million cases of cholera in Yemen. And cholera is an example of something that is easily treatable with just like
It's so
clean
preventable.
water. And preventable.
It's maddeningly, like, just so. It gets me really angry to think about that in general, because cholera shouldn't even be a thing. Like, it's very, very easy to prevent, and nevertheless they've got 1 million cases of it, which is just insane.
It's awful. 7 million people are at risk of famine, and more than 80% of the population is in need of humanitarian assistance. The aid that does come in to help these people is often stolen. And Yemen has, and first, I don't like the be a Debbie Downer, but if you want to get a sense of the amount of human suffering and starvation that's going on in that country, just type in Yemen war kid or child, and you're going to see emancipated children, and it's really terrible. It's a terrible thing to look at, and I think it's necessary to look at it to understand, what exactly it is going on in this country. Children are basically just starving to death in their homes. Mm-hmm. Like,
the UNDP figures that every 12 minutes a Yemeni child dies. And this was a statistic as of, like, I think it was August of 2019. I can imagine it's worse now.
Yeah, and then COVID-19 just hit the area as well. I don't know.
Yep, they have evidently they have the worst COVID. This is what I read, so a grain of salt here. COVID-19, they have the worst death rates in the world for this particular disease. Apparently, it kills 1 in 4 people who test positive. But I want to say that the reason why that statistic is so high, the percentage of people who die, is because they only test the people who end up in the hospital. They, as we pointed out before, have trouble getting fucking Tylenol in their country. They're definitely not getting, widespread, testing and contact tracing in Yemen. That's not happening, right? So the likelihood is that the actual statistic, the death rate, is probably much, much lower, but the fact that it looks so high is emblematic of the problem. They can't possibly, test everyone or even be consistent with testing in general, because they're fucked.
Yeah. It's a shitty situation. And when countries end up failing, when states end up failing, and there's complete economic ruin, and people start starving, and parents watch their children starve, it creates a really terrible environment for human trafficking. So Yemen is often used as a transit country for women and children from the Horn of Africa. They receive fraudulent job offers in the Gulf states, but are tricked and subjugated to, I'll be blunt, just sexual slavery. According to the Department of Labor, so children in Yemen engage in the worst forms of child labor, including in commercial sexual exploitation, sometimes as a result of human trafficking and armed conflict, including by Houthi insurgent forces and other armed groups. Children also engage in child labor and fishing. Research found no evidence of a policy on the worst forms of child labor outside of child soldiering, such as commercial sexual exploitation and child trafficking. So in Yemen, boys, like teenage boys, like adolescent boys, like 13 years old, they're used as checkpoint guards for whatever militia that they're using, that they're been kind of drafted towards. So everyone's using them. The Saudis are basically purchasing. The Saudis in the UAE are basically smuggling child soldiers from Sudan into Yemen. Multiple parties are using child labor as cannon fodder, and then a lot of these kids just end up as drug smugglers, or maybe just beggars on the street. There's a really bad homeless population too, of just like young people who do not have a fucking thing. Right now, 233,000 people have been killed in the war, according to the UN Humanitarian Office. The majority of these people have died of either starvation or disease. And Saudi and UAE airstrikes have led to the destruction of massive amounts of internal infrastructure. So the Saudis are doing things like high altitude bombing from F-35s and indiscriminately bombing targets. And when they do use laser-guided missiles, I mean, there's a case where they shot a school bus, which killed about 40 children, which is absolutely ridiculous that they used a laser-guided missile to blow up
a fucking school bus.
But that's a totally Saudi thing to do. Go after your children when you're losing the war. Mm-hmm. Now, amidst the chaos, Al-Qaeda and the Arabian Peninsula has been able to use the current situation within their recruitment efforts. Basically, they're recruiting. They have a market of the most voiceless people in the world right now. So, I'm going to jump into the historical background of this war because I think it's really important to understand. So like many Middle Eastern countries, Yemen is a country that doesn't really exist. It's a construct. It's a country in name only, but it really has none of the real characteristics that you would consider to be a national identity. It's completely unified in name only. So Yemenis have really relied on indigenous tribes to regulate different regions of the country. So the southern tribes are primarily Sunni. The northern tribes are mostly Zaydi Shiites. And these different cultures and political factions, they clash in the city of Sana'a, where the central government is located, the largest city in Yemen. And it's smack right in the middle of the country, Sana'a. So let's try to pull this back, and this is going to get confusing, so just bear with me.
Buckle up.
Buckle up, buckaroo. In the 1800s, northern Yemen was part of the Ottoman Empire, and southern Yemen was part of the British Empire. So the British used the city of Aden as a refueling point for ships traveling through the Suez Canal. Aden was technically part of India at this time, since ships traveling from Europe to India would stop in Aden. They just treated it as if it were part of India. So the Brits were just
I didn't actually know that. That's interesting.
Yeah. So on paper, it was India. It was part of India. To the Brits in the 1800s, they were like, they're just a bunch of browns anyway. They're same country. Same thing. Same thing. This chunk of land, India. But, I mean, that was the whole reason in the 1800s before oil was discovered in the Middle East. That was a primary interest. Like the British really weren't interested in places like Iraq or Syria or Iran in the 1800s. They were interested only on what you call the Trucial Coast, which is like the UAE and Oman, like the East Coast, those islands there. Abu Dhabi, they were interested in those areas because there was a spice trade to India from the Arabian Peninsula. So India kind of guided their entire kind of Near East foreign policy, what they would call it. Now, Aden was part of the empire. The rest of southern Yemen wasn't technically part of the administrative unit, but they had a lot of influence in there. So most of the area around Aden is kind of desolate. So that's like the main point that you'd want to have. Like, they're not that interested in controlling these tribes, but when they did, they would use the same tactics of like divide and conquer, pit tribes against each other, that sort of thing. Now, after World War I, when the Turks left the Arabian Peninsula, northern Yemen gained its independence and became a monarchy. Southern Yemen Aden is occupied by the British until the late 1960s. So another 40 or so years. After World War II, though, when the British and French empires started to crumble, there was a political ideology called Pan-Arabism that spread throughout the Middle East. The leader of this movement is a guy that we've talked about a lot on this show. So if you're new, it's Gamal Abdel Nasser, who is an Egyptian colonel who overthrows the propped up pet king of the British at the time in Egypt. And when they overthrow the government, Nasser becomes president about 2 years later. Nasser drafts up a socialist constitution and starts to nationalize the economy. So after that, country after country in the Middle East, they catch the Pan-Arabist fever. And the British don't really like this. They get especially upset when Nasser tries to nationalize, or he does nationalize the Suez Canal in order to fund the Aswan Dam in Egypt. Because Egypt, there's terrible flooding every single year. So one of the big national projects that Nasser kind of rallied around was building a dam to prevent the yearly flooding of the Nile. The Nile still floods to this day.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm getting a little bit lost, admittedly. So I get the setup where we're splitting up north and south of Yemen, but like, what does this matter for the war in Yemen today? Like, how is that like relevant?
So the important context is that northern Yemen catches the fever of Pan-Arabism. So in 1962, there was a Nasserist military coup in North Yemen, launching a massive civil war that lasted about 8 years. So the Nasserists were backed by Egypt. Meanwhile, the royalists were backed by Saudi Arabia, Israel, the U.S., and the British. Isn't that crazy that Saudi Arabia, Israel, the U.S., and the British are all on one side in one conflict? Like, when does that ever happen? It's like, when is Saudi Arabia and Israel on the same side? That's crazy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. One of those rare alliances in history.
Yeah,
I guess.
I mean, shoot. At this point, we're normalizing relationships between a lot of those countries and Israel. So maybe it'll happen again.
Yeah, maybe sometime in the distant future, that alliance will
spring back up.
Will spring back up. So the Nasserist side eventually wins, and they create the Yemen Arab Republic in the north. However, this is at a major cost to Egypt. It's called Egypt's Vietnam. They lose over 25,000 soldiers, mainly fighting a guerrilla insurgency. And while they're fighting in Yemen, this also gives Israel the opportunity to destroy their air force and invade the Sinai Peninsula.
So basically the end of Egypt, right?
So basically this was the end of Egypt. This was the end of the dream, because the goal of the Pan-Arabist, of the Nasserites, they wanted to create a massive Arab superstate, expanding all of North Africa and all the Middle East. And they wanted to eventually absorb like Saudi Arabia and like the monarchy's oil revenues, and then fund, have these big state-run industries, and have like a really large social welfare state.
How would you categorize the like political leaning of the Nasserists and that pan-Arab like state? Like what kind of government would that have ideally been for them? So is that like a representative government? Is it like communist? Is it like, what is it?
I guess technically they would be a democratic socialist country.
Okay.
They were socialists. They were admitted socialists. They were left-wing populist.
Kind of we're not talking about like, ISIS style caliphate here.
We're not talking about that at all. We're talking about secular left-wing socialist, like a left-wing nationalist socialist party.
Right, but not so far left wing that you would describe it as communist, right?
No, they weren't communist, but they were socialist, and they actually hated they didn't like communist ideology.
But that's probably important. Yeah.
They wanted to keep religion basically out of the government. What they focused on more was Arab nationality rather than the religious aspect. So
Ethnic nationalism.
They didn't want to have this type of religious divide within the states. So that's why they focused on Pan-Arabism. Pan-Arabism, the ideology comes from Coptic Egyptians, which are the Christian Egyptians.
Coptic Christians, right. Mm-hmm.
So the roots are to create a super state that encompasses all of the Arab speaking countries of the world. And they never really got that close, to be completely honest.
No.
Egypt.
But there was that one bit with Jordan, right? With Transjordan. Was it Transjordan at the time?
No, it was with Syria. So Egypt and Syria united into the United Arab Republic for a 2-year period, and then the union broke up. Because
that didn't last long.
It just Nasser just didn't really treat the Syrians as equal when it came to like a unity government. But Iraq, when they were going through complete chaos, because all these countries were going after coup after coup, Iraq tried to join the Union at the end because they were telling them that they were about to go communist, but they weren't able to be absorbed into this state. But the state was not really didn't really have that much of a chance when you think about it.
Right. So getting back to Yemen though, so we have this northern section that gets popular with the Nasserists, right? So they make the what did you call them again? The northern one, the Northern Yemeni Republic, the Yemen Arab Republic in the north. But then there's also still the south, which previously the British were in, right? So what happens to them?
So you have the Yemen Arab Republic in the north, and then the British leave southern Yemen in 1967, and southern Yemen reorient itself to the Soviet Union. So they go full communist.
Okay.
So they actually create a communist state in southern Yemen. So we have two states in Yemen. We have the YAR, the Yemen Arab Republic in the north, and then we have the PDRY, the People's Republic of Yemen in the south. So are you following me?
Yeah, we've created a divide, a very clear political divide among a group of ethnic people.
And the Civil War does not include the South. So you would think that, I think when I first started reading about this, I just figured the North and the South split because of the Civil War. The Civil War was only in the North. The South wasn't involved in the Civil War. Mm-hmm. So the South did its own thing. They peeled off and became a communist country.
Right.
The North had the war between the Arab nationalists and the royalists. Now, these two new Yemens, they were, over the years, they had some border clashes, and sometimes they had cordial relations. But eventually, they agreed to merge in 1990 with the president of North Yemen, Ali Abdullah Saleh, becoming president of the new state. And it's important to note that North Yemen had all the major population centers, and South Yemen
had Aden,
desolate, had Aden, and that was it.
Yeah. So did they ultimately adopt, the leftist but not communist style of government of the North?
So what happened is that when the Soviet Union fell, the southern Yemen almost entirely depended on Soviet subsidies. They had virtually no commerce or economy. So they were going to completely fall apart. So they went into North Yemen and they're like, hey, you gotta like bring us into statehood because we're falling apart right here. The Soviet Union just fell.
Right.
So that's the end of
that. Makes sense.
That's the end of that project. But
Henry, communism really wasn't ever tried in earnest, and that's why it never really worked, because they didn't really do real communism.
Yeah, I guess they didn't do real communism again.
Again.
Come on, guys, it's so easy to do real communism.
You just keep fucking it
Just
up.
give the
with not
power
real
to
comedy.
me.
Right.
Just give me centralized state control. That's how we do it. So Saleh, he was a military commander who came to power in 1978 after the previous president of North Yemen was assassinated. He had actually come from a lower level tribe. He was a commander of a military district right off the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And he was able to take advantage of like smuggling opportunities and sell access to like certain cargo, like just smuggling opportunities. So he had a lot of power. And when he takes control of the state, he creates this real complex political patronage system. What it's referred as neo-patrimonialism. Do you ever hear that word, neo-patrimonialism?
Nope.
So
Nope.
let me explain to you what neo-patrimonialism is. It refers to a system of government in which an office of power is used for personal use and gains, as opposed to strict division of the private and public spheres.
Oh, so the Trump administration.
Yuck, 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 yuck. Ha, 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 ha. You really burned Donald Trump right there, Danny. Good one.
Sorry, I had to. It was just too easy. We can also say that the Biden administration will do the same thing.
Every fucking political administration. How about that?
Yeah. We'll talk about that in a bit too.
But this is the definition I got from a book called The Historical Dictionary of Democracy.
Okay.
But it's not really a word that's thrown around too much. But basically, it means that the government dishes out resources for favors or loyalty from either specific ethnic groups, tribes, friends, family, whatever. But the whole it's basically
Daniels,
just
the whole lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically just a front to enrich certain groups. It is a state that has all the outward characteristics that make it look like a modern nation state. Like they have a president, they have elected officials, they have a legal system and a constitution, but in reality, the state's core matter is just sharing resources with their cronies.
Right.
So basically, you could really throw every single government in the entire world in here, but including the United States government, especially, like with our special interest in how in government contracting system. But this really refers to almost to extreme examples in countries in Africa and Eastern Europe and in the Middle East. Like those are like the extreme examples of it, where the presidents of these countries are basically just salespeople. They're salespeople who just sell off the natural resources and fuck people.
It's like you want timber, cool. You want coal, cool. You want oil, cool.
Yeah. These are among the most corrupt governments in the world. Like in Zimbabwe, for an example, there is a missing amount of money, and the excuse was the snake ate it. Not Zimbabwe. Yeah, it was Zimbabwe. No, it might have been Nigeria.
Man. A snake ate the money.
The snake ate it.
What
so
snake?
That's the level of corruption. Iraq too is the government in Iraq is incredibly corrupt. So that being said, in Yemen, the core framework of government is provided by local tribes. So that's why it's necessary to set up this patronage system with these local tribes. So you're picking and choosing tribes that to enrich, that you want to ally yourself with. So it's important to pick the right ones, and it's also important to have these tribes, the military faction of these tribes, be on your side. So the Yemeni state, and you see this in Iraq as well, relies on tribal militias to defend national territory against foreign and domestic aggression. And within Yemen, I don't know if you guys have ever heard, but Yemen has been a place where people have been pumping fucking AK-47s and drones and just guns like hell. Like, this place is armed and loaded. Everyone has a fucking AK-47 in their kitchen. Like, It's every family is locked and loaded.
Well, they're cheap, so
They're
that's
cheap,
the thing.
and you had just decades of warfare. So you had decades of Soviet weapons going inside the country. You had decades of U.S. and Israeli and Saudi Arabia finances going to the north, to the Civil War, North Yemen. You've had so much warfare that it's just there's just massive amounts of arms there. That's how the Houthis are able to get their hands on on drones. They don't even really need to be armed by Iran. There's so many. Now, what this does is when you rely on these tribal militias for police activity and protecting your sovereign state,
Right, law enforcement. Mm-hmm.
what happens to the state is that they lose the monopoly of violence in the country. Therefore, what happens when you lose the monopoly of violence in a state?
Time to change the government so that you
It's
can
no longer a
regain it.
state.
Yep.
The state is defined by having the ability to monopolize violence within the country.
Right. And the offset of that is now we need to change the government so that we can regain the monopoly.
Yes.
That's what happens. That's what happens after.
So this is how the Houthis came to be. So the Houthis originate from the northern city of Sada in Yemen. They consider themselves, wait for it, Danny,
Oh, God. Here we go.
Hashemites.
Woo! Maybe they'll listen to me.
They consider themselves Hashemites, thus being the descendants from the Prophet Muhammad. So Houthis, they adhere to the Zaydi faith, which is a dissident sect of Islam. Salafist or Orthodox Sunnis would consider them heretics. They are Shia, but actually reject Khomeiniism or Twelver Shiism. So the Shia that is popular in Iran and Iraq,
They're not the same as that.
they're not the same as that. There's something very different to a point where it's confusing to even tell what they are.
Shia, but not really. Kind
Yeah.
of.
They're kind of like Alawites, like kind of a weird fringe sect within the religion. Now, the sect was founded by Zayd ibn Ali, the leader of a failed rebellion against the Islamic Caliphate in 740 AD. And unlike the Iranian Shia, whose theology lends itself to subjection to authority, the Zaydis hold this semi anarchistic worldview. So
they're whoa, wait, hold on. They're anarchists too?
I wouldn't say I wouldn't go as far as to say that they're like anarchists, but they definitely have a more philosophical and rationalistic approach to their theology. So for example, they chose so unlike the Iranian Shia who they see. So one of the big divides in Islam is the succession of Muhammad. So Sunnis believe that there's like a council that selects the succession, and then Shias believe that there's a direct lineage from the grandson from Muhammad's mother's side. And the Iranians, the 12er Shias follow Muhammad al-Baqir, but the Zaydis preferred Baqir's brother Zayd, who, and the reason why they chose him as the rightful successor is because he rose up and fought a rebellion against the tyrants and the I forget the dynasty at the time, whatever
the caliphate was
in 740 AD, but they saw al-Baqir as illegitimate because he didn't fight against tyranny. So
they follow the strong one, right? Or at least that's what they believe. So they're like badasses then.
They're
right?
kind of like libertarians. They're like the libertarians of the Muslim world.
What's a word that we can make like ANCAP, but like anarcho-Islamists? And Islam? I can't do it.
Well, according to John Brennan, libertarians are terrorists now. So,
oh well, yeah.
Well, what to do? I knew it was only a matter of time I was going to be put on the list. But they had long maintained their autonomy from the state, but were pushed to the brink when the Saudis basically sent in fundamentalist preachers who challenged the authority of local religious and tribal authorities, and this led to a rise of a movement called the Believing Youth. So it was a Zaidi revivalist group that eventually turned into a military force. Who would have believed that could have happened? The Houthis in 2004, they rose up against Hadi because Hadi is a corrupt bastard, but they failed this time.
So I'm getting the feeling that we're probably going to want to talk about, our involvement in this, and by our, I mean obviously the U.S. So like, how do we get, messed into this situation?
Good question. In 2009, when Obama became president,
he wore a tan suit, and
one of the first things that happened when he became president, he was like, I'm gonna, end Guantanamo Bay, and I'm gonna stop these reckless wars. And then he stepped into the Oval Office, and someone passed him. It's like, hey, Barack, look at this remote control. He's like, what's that? The control's a drone. He's like, oh, this is pretty cool. I'm flying it. It's like, you could just push this button and we'll blow shit up. And he's like, I like being president. And that's what happened. So one of the first things that Obama did was he declared a war drone, a drone war against Al-Qaeda in Somalia, Pakistan, and Yemen. And Al-Qaeda's Yemeni franchise had recently been blamed for the attacks, such as the underpants bomber. Remember that?
Yep, I do.
And the FedEx bomb attempts. So Obama started bribing Saleh with guns and money to get permission to wage this drain war on Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. What Saleh ends up doing, because he was at war with the Houthis before, he takes the guns and the money and he starts to go after the Houthis. So he doesn't attack Al-Qaeda, he attacks the Houthis in the north. He's supposed to go, because Al-Qaeda's in the south.
Because giving money to these people always,
because giving money to these fuckers always works out. So the Houthis only end up getting bigger after this. And then when the Arab Spring...
they're using those drone strikes as like, hey, look at this. We're fighting against the people that are just indiscriminately bombing us.
It's called blowback.
Right. Remember that these people were, as you pointed out before, they followed the Zayd, who rose up and fought against tyrants, right? So like, can you see the parallels here, right? There's like a religious connection there.
There is a theological connection to this rise up. So when the Arab Spring swept across the Middle East, Yemen, like Pan-Arabism, was no exception to I guess the fever that was hidden. Can you feel it? The fever, the Arab Spring fever. Yemen was not an exception. Saleh ends up getting his face melted off with a car bomb, but he survived. There was an assassination attempt. He almost gets killed. He's put into a hospital. He's in really bad condition. And what ends up happening is that he allegedly resigns in favor of his VP, Hadi. Hadi is the Hillary Clinton / Saudi pick to be president of Yemen, because Saudi Arabia is involved in this patronage network as well. They have their favorites and their winners, and they have their resources and their geopolitical interest within Yemen as well. They've always had an interest in Saudi, Yemeni policy. So they hold an election while Saleh's in the hospital with a one-man ballot for Hadi. So Hadi is the incumbent president because there's an assassination attempt on Saleh. and they hold the election that they have, that Hillary Clinton starts bragging about as a breakthrough in democracy, has one guy on the ballot.
Just one dude.
Just one dude. Just one dude on the ballot. So they pushed the president out, Saleh, out in favor of the VP. The problem is that Hadi was extremely unpopular. And when Saleh wakes up, he says, I didn't agree to this. This wasn't the plan. So he brings his military to the north, and then he joins up with the Houthis. So the combined army marched down. So now Hadi and Houthis combined. They're at least an alliance. He doesn't become a Houthi, but there's like
Hadi Houthi.
He's the president who was bombing him now becomes a Houthi. It's like dances with wolves.
If you can't beat him, join him, right?
He brings his military north, joins up with the Houthis, and then the combined army march down to the capital, Sana'a. They conquer it, and that is the outbreak of the war.
This shit sounds like a plot line in Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Right? Like, just fucking the Baratheons flipping sides or some shit like that. Like this is something else. Or not the Baratheons. Who are the river folk in the middle? I forget.
The
Red Wedding
Tyrells are the flower.
Nope. Well, the
Tullies,
Tyrells are a good
Tullies.
example too, because Tullies. Thank you, Tullies. Fucking Tullies.
What is a bastard? Oh, fun digression.
That's not the river people, right? I'm talking about the old river dude who did the Red Wedding. Was he a Tully? No.
The Kashmirs? The Castarks? No, that's not the Castarks. Walter Frey, the Freys.
Frey, yeah, the Frey. Those fuckers, right? The ones that switch sides. They're like, all right, well, fuck you then. Like, you did me wrong, so now I'm going to switch sides and I'm going to fuck you up.
Hold on. I need to explore this with you real quick.
Okay.
We're drifting. We're going to drift way off topic, but so the other day,
who cares?
I was talking to, I forget who I was talking to, but the conversation of like Game of Thrones bastard names came up. You know how?
Oh, okay.
If you're
snow, sand, so on. And
snow,
so forth.
yeah. If you're a bastard from the north, you're snow. If you're a bastard from Dorne, you're a sand. If you're a bastard from the river country, you're a river. So I was thinking of the bastard names in cities in the U.S. So like if you're a bastard from Chicago, your name would be Danny Wind, for example. Like Wind. He's a wind. He's a wind. He's like Chicago, Windy City. Yeah. So we were trying to think of names, bastard names for U.S. cities.
Oh man. Okay. New York City would be like either Apple, even though I hate it, or like, I don't know, Lights or something like that.
That's what my friend brought up Apple too, and I hated it too, but that's the best one. It has to be 2 syllables.
Yeah.
It has to be a quick 2-syllable name.
What would Florida be?
Sunshine?
Like, no, yeah, maybe.
Like Colorado, Rocks.
Yeah.
Danny Rocks.
Danny Rocks. Good old Danny Rocks.
If you're from California, you'll be Snowflake.
Or Soy Boy.
Soy Boy. Yeah, Soy Boy.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Avocado.
Fun project. I think about it. Just if you're a Game of Thrones fan, it's a fun thought experiment.
Right.
All right.
What do you think
back to the war on Yemen?
Would be? Where were we? We were talking about like.
So let's get into some more like the politics of it. So we explained the history, or at the very least, the lead up to the war at a high level. Let's get into why the Saudis have intervened in the war, why the U.S. backs the Saudis, and what exactly is the political situation on the ground. Because the reasoning that we're told that there needs to be an intervention in Yemen is because the Houthis are a Iranian proxy group, and that this is all Iran, creating chaos in the region, and they're the ones that are blamed for the mass chaos and the starvation that's going on, which it's surprising because every Yemeni expert that I've talked to or I've read almost unanimously agrees that Iran has a limited influence with the Houthis rather than a large influence with the Houthis.
Right. No, not zero influence, which is noteworthy, but also not nearly as like big of an influence as, you know, this line of argumentation goes, where that we have to intervene because it's, you know, we need to be a bulwark against Iran, and, you know, stretching their tendrils across, you know, the Middle East or something crazy like that.
Well, I think it's a matter of just grouping in Shias together, because the Houthis are a technically Shia group, and they can just lump
But we
it
just
in.
explained that there's different Shias, so that's like very reductionist to say, oh, because they're both Shias, you know, they must be like friends, you know, or like that they must have the same goals.
Most people don't know the difference between a Sunni and a Shia, let alone different sects within the Shia.
Correct.
So I think it's pretty easy to.
I mean, I just learned a ton about the Houthi brand today, so there you go.
Most people, at least in the U.S., don't understand the division between the two sects of Islam. Asking them to understand the sects between the two sects of Islam is asking a little too much. And when someone does understand it,
I'm not even super certain about the sects between like Christianity in the United States. Like, what's the difference between a Baptist and a Methodist? I can't tell you.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like, who thinks about this stuff? But when you talk to someone when they do understand like the basic, like there is a split. There was a schism at one point. A lot of people have like the narrative in their head like, this is an ancient war that's lasted 1,000 years. No, over 1,000 years at this point. Which is not really the case either. There's been kind of like times of violence between the two sects, but now is like the most violent time in history between the two religions. Like, it's only gotten more violent, not less violent.
Recently.
Recently. Over the past 10 years, it's been since the war in Iraq, really, since 2003.
Which one? 1, 2, or 3?
3. I mean, not 2. Yeah, 1, 2, or 3. Well, 3 is the war between the Sunnis and the Shias.
Okay.
Iraq War 2 is our invasion and removing Saddam Hussein. The civil war that breaks out after we remove Saddam Hussein between Sunnis and Shias within the region, that's Iraq War 3. And then
gotcha.
You know, Iraq War 3.5 is when ISIS comes back into Iraq after and sacks Mosul. So that's Iraq War 3.5.
They need to put an end to this franchise of war, because I don't. It's too complicated. There's too many sequels. That needs to stop.
There's too many sequels to it, and it's bad. But yeah, asking people to know those divisions it's just like an esoteric topic. Like, who's interested in this stuff besides the people listening to this show right now? The difference between different branches of Islam and why they're fighting with each other. Because I think the most important thing to think is, don't think about the theology behind a lot of these groups. Think about, at least when they're fighting each other, think about the political inclinations. So Sunni and Shia in these regions are political terms rather than like religious terms in a lot of ways. Just like in Ethiopia, where we were talking about Ethiopia about 2 months ago, the war that broke out.
The Tigrays, right?
The Tigrays and the different ethnic groups are political groups because the way that they administer their country is through a form of ethnic federalism. So the same applies in the Middle East, but on a religious context and on a tribal level. Yeah, and a tribal and a religious context. But likely, when one religion gains power, one government, they dish out favoritism. Again, going back to our word of the day, which is neo-patrimonialism. I'm
never going to remember that word.
Neo-patrimonialism, the word of the day. When you dish out favors based off some sort of political, religious, or ethnic term, it creates this type of environment where the other side is forced to band together. Now, the invasion of Saudi Arabia, all these wars are for some type of kind of Machiavellian geopolitical interest at the end of the day. Like, what does Saudi Arabia have to gain out of that? Well, I guess number one is they can say that they can portray themselves as a regional power. They've never really been a military power ever. Saudi Arabia has never had a strong military they haven't had a strong military until they sacked Mecca.
Despite having a lot of money and a lot of weapons.
In 1920 or whatever. So they've never really been a strong military influence. They had the money. They
like
the
to
funds.
Pretend like they are, though.
Yeah, they like to pretend like they are, but they're not really. And there's also a lot of pipeline politics as well, between avoiding certain straits. And we talked about this in our last episodes about Yemen, but there's pipeline politics between creating more port access to other parts of Yemen where Saudi Arabia needs to have kind of extend their patronage network. But I don't think that's just the reason. I think there's a lot of, like every single war, there's a lot of reasons rolled up into one. So kind of banning it, combining it into, or blaming one reason other than taking all the reasons and kind of evaluating them together is ignorant and not fruitful when examining these conflicts. If you just pin it on one thing, like if the Iraq War, if you just say the war was for oil or only, or if the war was only for the petrodollar only, or if the Vietnam War, the war was only about the domino effect only, like you're not really getting to the root of the issues. Now, for the U.S., the U.S.'s influence, and I want to concentrate on this, it's purely out of MIC contracting. It's purely out of just
military,
profit.
Industrial. Right. And I did a lot of research on this particular topic, but how do you want to set this up? Like what do you think is important to know on a high level?
So I think it's important to talk about Raytheon, and just the overall, the U.S. military contractors' influence on prolonging the war.
Okay, so let's talk about it. And Raytheon will be a huge focus, but there are definitely other groups as well that we'll bring up. So specifically Raytheon, but other weapons manufacturers have like this interest in war in general, right? The premise is really fucking simple. If you make guns and you sell bombs, war means profits for you, right? So I don't think that's a hard concept to get around your head. So specifically when we're talking about the military-industrial complex and its relationship to the war in Yemen, it's like impossible for you to separate the two, right? A war in Yemen is inherently good for Raytheon because that means that they can make a lot of money, and I have a lot of evidence to back that up. So obviously, as we've been talking about, there's been a lot of parties involved in the war in Yemen, and the U.S. has been one of the bigger ones, right? Primarily through weapon sales, though. So we sell a ton of weapons to Saudi Arabia and some of their partners, and those weapons are in no uncertain terms, they're used to kill Yemenis, right? We sell them weapons, they kill Yemenis with those weapons. Now, Raytheon specifically happens to be the second largest arms manufacturer in the world. And they are a major provider of these weapons, and they have super, super close ties to Saudi Arabia. So they actually were one of the first people to build, one of the first weapons manufacturers specifically, to build a permanent base there. That happened around the 1960s. And they even was neo-patrimonialism, right? Is that the word? Did I say that correctly?
Neo-patrimonialism.
Right, the neo-patrimonialism here was that they ended up hiring a bunch of the Saudi royal family to act as consultants for them, right? So just to get in good with the with the royal family. They just hired a bunch of them, and they've been operating a branch in Riyadh since 2017. So here's some stats. After the war officially began in 2015, Raytheon's stock price went from about $108 to more than $180 in 2019. So that's billions of dollars in weapon sales and lots of fucking profit, too much profit. That is an 80% gain in 4 years. That's unheard of. It's crazy. So
repeat that. Repeat that figure one more time. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, 2015, March 2015 specifically. This is when the war started. If you looked at Raytheon's stock price, if you wanted to buy one stock of Raytheon, it's $108. If you looked at it again in 2019, at the end of 2019, it was $180. So that's a 4-year period, 2015 to 2019, goes from about 100 to about 180. That's like an 80% bump.
Who needs to get GameStop stocks?
Good one. Yeah, that's a good insertion here. Yeah, because GameStop stocks today jumped like crazy because of an unrelated issue. But this is the real money is here.
But the ultimate way to the conversation is coming up about short stocks with the GameStop.
Oh shit! I think you're onto something.
And it's just the ultimate way of manipulating a value of a stock price is to
short the shit out of Raytheon. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Short. Yeah, they'll fucking drone strike your house.
Yeah, right.
Dude, that's what all these new domestic terror laws coming out. John Brennan was on MSNBC and basically labeled every single person who's not left of Rachel Maddow, a potential terrorist. He called out libertarians at the end. He was like, "Yeah, we need to talk about libertarian, white supremacist, a whole list of
right, well, I think white supremacist is fair.
White supremacists, and then he lumps in
libertarians generally. Yeah, that's not. I don't
cocksucker! That guy is a fucking piece of shit.
Yeah,
God, I hate him.
Way to paint with the broadest possible brush there. Every single libertarian, you're all fucking terrorists. Yeah, no, fuck that. So hopefully I don't get in too much trouble because I am still gunning for that Hashemite king position that we were talking about before. But
hey, man, if there's going to be a new country that we can form, maybe we can carve up another part of sliver of Yemen. They seem to be divided. Maybe we can get a nice little spot for a new monarchy over there. And
yeah, maybe
all you got to do is just suck John Brennan's dick, and then maybe we'll get there.
Maybe. So let's talk about a little. It was back to Raytheon here. So there's this guy. He was the vice president of business development and the CEO of Raytheon. His name is John Harris II. So John here was asked by CNBC in February of 2019 to do an interview about Raytheon's bombs being used in Yemen. This is a direct quote from his response. And you're going to fucking love this shit. "We are an element of the U.S. policy. Our role is not to make policy. Our role is to comply with it." I'm just going to let that sit for a second. Because if you're not following so far and you haven't made the connections yet, I'm about to let it rip. So we're talking about a company who directly profits from the sale of arms. A company who, as I pointed out, made an 80% stock gain in a 4-year period because of a war in Yemen, is trying to tell you, or any of us, CNBC specifically, that they're not making policy, they're just complying with U.S. policy is bullshit. It's bullshit. Because and we're about to talk a little bit more about lobbying and things like that, but it is bold-faced bullshit. All you need to do is follow the money, and also follow the people that they put in power. So let's do that for a moment.
And look at the think tanks they fund.
Oh, yeah, seriously. Like,
they don't make policy. Don't the think tanks don't. That's
ass.
not they're there for, to think about these crazy shit.
Yeah, my ass. And by the way, I'm about to rip up Democrats, Republicans, and no one is safe from now on for the rest of the show. No one is safe. Okay, so both Obama
so get
and
ready,
Trump,
snowflake.
right? Fuck your feelings. I'm about to drop some facts on you. So okay, Obama and Trump are definitely like our prime suspects for the last several years in this particular issue, because both of them have employed or appointed Raytheon lobbyists to serve in senior roles in the Defense Department. So the ones I'm going to talk about here are William Lynn and Mark Esper. And Biden, brand new dude, right, just chose General Lloyd Austin, and he sits on the Raytheon board, and he chose him for defense secretary. And basically, this guy just went right through the confirmation process, which happened on the 19th. So just as a setup, we've got 3 Raytheon people, lobbyists, serving in high Defense Department roles. You want to tell me? You want to tell me again that Raytheon isn't making policy?
It's interesting that Biden went with the Raytheon board member than the Lockheed Martin lobbyist.
I mean, it could have been one or the other.
Yeah, he chose between the two. But to Joe Biden's defense, I don't really complicate him very often, but Lloyd Austin is a way better pick than Michelle Flournoy. Well,
yeah. I mean, if you were choosing between those two, sure, I would also pick Lloyd Austin. But
Lloyd Austin, I'm going to actually jump to the defense of Lloyd. I rarely put in this position. Lloyd Austin, obviously, he's corrupted in the process as being a Raytheon lobbyist, but we're working with a relatively low bar right here, so just bear with me. He's better than most people on a lot of this stuff. He actually, because he was in charge of Lloyd Austin was CENTCOM. He was CENTCOM. So
Central Command, yeah.
So he was actually one of the guys in the context of Yemen who wanted to work with the Houthis to fight Al Qaeda. He was like, "Why are we should actually?" They identified the Houthis as a group that they wanted to ally with and use as a proxy to fight Al Qaeda. A lot of the guys in the CIA over there were like, "We'd rather work with the Houthis than the people who blew up the USS Cole and did 9/11. But then again, like our policymakers right now, if they could, they rather convince the Americans that Hezbollah did 9/11 than Al Qaeda did at this point. So
yeah, I mean, look, you're right, and I think I'm being a bit pessimistic here. But I'm pointing this out on purpose because
I think things are fickle, and there's obviously the interest there. So point it out. Like, I'm not sold on him. I'm just saying compared to other people within the defense industry, and
Biden's been on a bit of a progressive tear lately. So maybe he'll surprise us. And he said kind of. That he was going to end U.S. support for the war, but he was super vague about it. And then he goes and picks, Lloyd Austin, who happens to be a Raytheon guy. And yeah, is he better than most of the picks that you could probably do? Sure, but in context, I am not super confident that a mega company, second largest arms manufacturer in the world, Raytheon, isn't going to pull some favors to make sure that they keep making money off of something, right? And so that I'm not confident that even if it is Lloyd Austin, and even if Biden said that he was going to end support for the U.S. war, I'm not confident in that. And if we look at the history of it, both through Obama and Trump, we're not seeing any of the progression, the forward motion that we should be. And if we're talking about Obama, he's obviously played a big role in starting the war there, because he gave Saudi Arabia that green light to go ahead and attack. Ultimately, this was I don't want to absolve Saudi Arabia, right? It wasn't Obama who said, who like directed them to go to war, but he also said, all right, well, do what you got to do, you know? And you know,
placate the Saudis, that was his verbiage. So,
exactly, to placate the Saudis.
Saudi Arabia was upset over the Iran deal, so they had to throw them a bone, saying, all right, well then, we'll support this foreign intervention that you have.
Exactly. And the way that they decided to support it was in a huge increase in U.S. arms sales to basically all foreign governments, but specifically Saudi Arabia, so that they can keep up this attack on Yemen. And there's some stats here. U.S. arms exports in 2013 went from 6.9. In 2009, it went from 6.9 billion to 8.7 billion in 2012. So that's a huge fucking jump. We're talking about billions of dollars in increases. And that's according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute's database. And that's a 25% increase. When we're already talking about billions of dollars, and 25% on top of billions of dollars is nuts. And specifically, out of that increase, exports to Saudi Arabia increased, and this was 4,489% between 2008 and 2012, and then again between 2013 and 2017. So we're crossing both Trump and Obama's presidencies here. During both of these terms, we're talking about a 4,489% increase in weapons exports. Insane. And the argument has always been that this is, fucking defensive support. Such bullshit, because they're not using it for defense. Like, what? I never heard of a fucking laser guided missile on a bus being considered defense. And this is just nuts.
Yes, it's a defensive war to blockade the poorest country in the Middle East and just bomb the living shit out of them because of Iran influence. And when was the last time any type of Shia, because that's what the big concern is the Shia is the new enemy. Therefore, we take the side of here's what happened. We screwed up so bad in Iraq War II by empowering the Shia population, by removing the Sunni strongman, empowering the majority Shia population, that now that we have to, the rest of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East is correcting our mistakes. And correcting our mistakes means siding with the Sunni radicals. And I mean Sunni radicals. I don't mean Sunnis, like everyday Sunnis. I mean like Wahhabist Salafist.
Right.
Because they're the best fighters. The head choppers, the moderate rebels. And siding with Al-Qaeda in areas in Syria and in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen. Because that's what we're doing. Like, we're on the same side as Al-Qaeda.
And the thing is that we keep like going back and forth about it too. We're not like consistently on a side. The only side that we're on is on Raytheon's side, because there was a point where Obama had agreed to halt new Raytheon bombs being sent to Saudi Arabia, and this was already after the bombs had been purchased. They just hadn't been shipped yet, right? And so Obama, because he's getting a lot of flack for this, and specifically a lot of progressives were calling this shit out, and so he stopped at the end of his term a shipment of weapons to Yemen, and doesn't make up for the fact that there was plenty of years of him increasing the sales and like providing logistical support to Saudi Arabia so that they can murder Yemenis. Doesn't make up for that, but better something than nothing, and he put a halt to it. But literally a couple months later, when Trump is in office, he then he puts up Thomas Kennedy as so Thomas Kennedy is a representative of Raytheon, and he and Thomas Kennedy they end up going to Saudi Arabia in May of 2017. Remember that first international visit that he did, where he's like putting his hand on the globe and shit, right?
Yeah. Who could forget?
Right. So Thomas Kennedy, Raytheon guy, is involved in this, and then like the day after, Trump approves the shipment of the weapons that Obama blocked. But also, like, not to stick up for Trump, but like he might have just done it because Obama didn't want to send the weapons. You know what? I'll send you the weapons. Fuck Obama. Like it could have been that, but I'm pretty sure
Trump's mentality was, look at this. Like he looks at everything. He looked at everything. I still speak about him as he's still in office. He looked at everything as transactional. So I don't think he ever looked at, when he said the right things about wars in the Middle East, I don't think he was ever really looking at it in a moral sense. He was always looking at it in a practical sense.
Right.
Which, with that same logic, though, you can see how he could see how it's practical to sell arms to Saudi Arabia while they're essentially committing a genocide. Because in his mind, it's these Muslims are killing these Muslims. If we don't sell them weapons, someone else is. Like, that's his. I think that was his mindset. Like,
100%.
Why not sell them? These Muslims hate these Muslims. Why not do it? Like,
right. It's fucked up. And then like moving on, Mark Esper, who was also, I believe he was on the board of Raytheon, if I'm not mistaken. But he's definitely Raytheon affiliated, becomes the Secretary of the Army, and then eventually SecDef, so Secretary of Defense, and that was in July of 2019, until just this past November when he stepped down. And during his confirmation hearings, Esper basically refused to recuse himself or say that he would recuse himself from decisions that would affect Raytheon. So he was asked, hey, if you come up with a situation where, this might affect, bomb sales for Raytheon, would you recuse yourself from that decision-making process? And he was like, nope. So fucking savage. Who else do we have? Okay, there's this guy.
Charles Faulkner.
Yeah, Charles Faulkner. He was a lobbyist for defense procurement for Raytheon, and he actually was removed from his post. But he basically fast tracked a $8 billion Raytheon arms sale to Saudi Arabia, and he was the acting assistant secretary of state. And what else? David Urban, who. This guy was apparently in the same class at West Point with Mark Esper and Mike Pompeo, and they call themselves the West Point Mafia, which I think is fucking stupid. But
what
he
losers.
was, so he was a lobbyist that Raytheon had got some support for, and if I'm getting this correct, I think he was a part of the McKeon Group. So there's this defense industry lobbying firm. One of the two bigger ones. There's the American Defense International and McKeon Group, but this McKeon Group is actually pretty interesting. So that was actually founded by a former representative from California. His name was Buck McKeon, and he served on the Armed Services Committee from 91 to 2014. And go figure, his largest campaign donors come from Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he basically, McKeon Group lobbies on behalf of, these arms sales people, but also they lobby on behalf of Saudi Arabia, the government of Saudi Arabia. So they are a registered, foreign agent, essentially. And in 2018, there was going to be this vote that came up to end the U.S. involvement in Yemen. You might remember it. This was the Bernie Sanders and Mike Lee bill, right? And what ended up happening was that the McKeon Group hit up Jim Inhofe, who at the time was the Armed Services Committee chair, and they had a conversation, and that conversation was on the record as being on behalf of Saudi Arabia, in their capacity to do lobbying. And the next day, Inhofe voted in favor of continuing U.S. support to Saudi Arabia. And after that, the day after that, McKean Group donated $1,000 to the senator. So $1,000 was all it cost for, Inhofe to continue a war in Yemen.
$1,000 to continue.
In fairness, I think like
$2,500
is the most that you can get, but like in a given fiscal year. But $1,000, that's the price. That is Jim Inhofe's price.
It's surprisingly cheap to buy a politician.
I can fucking buy a politician at that rate.
It's not expensive to purchase one. If you look at like the campaign contributions,
yeah,
we're talking about like $2,000 contributions, and they're
right.
like, sure, well, I'll change my vote based on $2,000 to my campaign.
Right.
Thanks.
Like fuck my constituents, fuck morality, sure. fuck the people of Yemen. I got $2,000. I got $1,000.
Well, they believe the hype. Well, you justify it to yourself. You're like, Iran is the greatest threat for terrorism in the world. Yeah, I'm just protecting the U.S. These guys know what they're talking about.
And if I happen to get $1,000 out of it, great.
I'd rather have the $2,000 than not have the $2,000.
Exactly.
Iran is the largest sponsor of terrorism in the world. Mm-hmm. I'll take it. Look, which Muslims are we killing again? Great.
I've made it abundantly clear about Raytheon. They're not following U.S. policy. They're making U.S. policy. And no, are they directly writing it? Probably not. But they are definitely having the backroom phone calls and all this other stuff to make sure that what makes them money keeps happening. And I think at this point, I want to turn to a previous episode that we did that I actually used again in preparation for this particular episode, and that was the episode Understanding the War Industry, and that was back in November of 2020. And on that, we had an awesome guest, and that was Christian Sorensen, and he's a former Air Force veteran. He's an author of the book Understanding the War Industry, and he's also a part of the Eisenhower Media Network, which we like there. And this guy was super, super knowledgeable. And if this pissed you off and you want to be more pissed off and you want to find out a bit more, I would definitely listen to this episode, because he spells out to a T, like how entrenched the military-industrial complex, or the military-industrial and congressional triangle, which is what he refers to it as because he includes the Congress there, just how this is all set up. And it's frustrating and it's fucking annoying. And I actually went and listened to it again because, in preparation for this episode, I wanted to find out, like, what can we do about it? What's the next step? It seems like it's this unending cycle. And all the way at the end of that episode, and I won't spoil it too much, but, I think, Christian is super smart, but he also, he puts forward two options for ending the cycle that I don't think are viable in a pragmatic way. So on that's the only point that I'm not 100% with him on. His two options are that we nationalize war corporations, but good luck doing that because Capitol Hill is basically bought by those war corporations, so that'll never, that legislation will never happen. And then the second one would be, the way he describes it, when I was listening to it again the second time around, it feels like a communist revolt. Like it felt a little bit like it. But he talked about it in more pragmatic terms. He says that we democratize the workplace. And he basically says that on a local level...
That's what it's called.
Exactly.
That's what...
those were his words. Like
socialism. That's democratizing the workplace is socialism.
Right.
Christian's a great guy.
He is
not a socialist.
And he's super, super smart. But on this point, I feel like his and I'll quote him here. He says it would take clear communications and patience, but it can be pulled off. And I just don't agree. I don't think that we have clear communication, and I don't think that we have patience. So therefore, I don't think we can pull this off. Yeah, but I might be being overly pessimistic, right? But the point that we're getting at here is now that we have Biden, right, and Biden has at least in a way signaled that he wants to end support there, but on the other hand, has just recently appointed someone from Raytheon, leaves you begging the question: what do we do now, right? And I mentioned earlier that just earlier this week, January 25th, was the global day of action for the Yemen war. And I actually asked you about this, Henry, beforehand, and I'm like, hey, did you hear about this? And what'd you say?
I did not hear about this.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of gives you, in a fucked up kind of way, it's emblematic of how helpful that global day of action was. That even people like us who follow this shit, who do a lot of research on it, who have been covering it for a while, not only did we not hear about it, but like literally the impacts of it have not been felt. It came and went, and I doubt it's going to make a difference. And what's fucked up about it is that like a bunch of people attended. I think it was like Danny Glover spoke at it, and like a bunch of other folks. Not just them. I wrote it down somewhere, but like if you go and Google it now, there's not like any. There's more articles about talking about the day of action than talking about the outcomes of the day of action. So,
yeah, it's kind of. I had not heard about the day of action until you told me right before this show, which is I'm usually pretty plugged into things like this, which is surprising. It may have just been because I've been busy, but I was actively preparing for this show this week, so it wasn't like I wasn't
didn't jump out
reading articles about Yemen. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that not a single article or not a single comment or I did not hear a thing about this.
Here's some people who were in attendance. So it was a protest, both an in-person protest and an online rally that happened at 7 p.m.
An online rally.
An online rally. That's probably why nothing happened.
Yeah,
nobody stormed the Capitol.
That sounds real effective. An online rally. Let's have an online rally.
Right. So that's the thing. Here, some of the speakers included Cornel West, Danny Glover, Shireen Almeida from the U.S., Danielle Obono from France, Yanis Varik something from Greece, and Jeremy Corbyn. A lot of people on that list. I have no idea who they are. Right.
So a lot of people on the list, you're not going to get mass support because. No disrespect to the progressives who listen to this show, but most people are going to look at that list and they're going to bat an eye and be like, there's just a bunch of socialist commies on that list, because that's what it was. Jeremy Corbyn, Danny Glover,
Cornel West.
They're all admitted socialist.
Right.
So,
but I mean, where were the anti-war, say, libertarians out there?
We didn't hear about it. The anti-war
you guys didn't even hear about it.
I didn't hear about it. People
we have to redo this.
Follow and speak to who are libertarians, who are anti-war, didn't hear they never mentioned anything to me. It's something you wouldn't keep secret, it's not something that you're like, oh, this is this cool party, I'm not going to let them know about this. Right. Like, this is something that anyone with remote interest you would want to rally. But
so the far left fucked it up and kept it to themselves, and then just basically like nothing happened.
I think that yelling at buildings and protesting doesn't really solve too much, to be completely honest.
But what are we gonna do? Clearly voting doesn't matter because all of those Congress people are bought. For $1,000, I can tell your congressman to tell you to go fuck yourself. As you point out, yelling at buildings and doing protests doesn't work either. So, and then for Christian Sorensen, he pointed out that we should do either nationalize war corporations. That's not going to happen. Or do a straight up socialist revolt and democratize the workplace.
There are other options besides
I'm really interested in hearing some real other options.
One option is that you can lobby yourself. You can pick up a phone and call Congress. You can go to Washington, D.C. and Congress. It's so ridiculous that these people, barge into the Capitol. You're able to speak to Congress legally. So
You can talk to him. Right.
You're able to create a meeting and lobby on your own behalf or on behalf of some policy that you're trying to achieve.
Constituency, right?
It's more about changing culture, because war. Here's the thing about war in the U.S. Since the Iraq War, we've been it's such an afterthought in most people. Most people don't really think about our military presence. Most people don't really think we have one anymore, because, and this is a good thing, is that our casualty rates have significantly dropped since the height of the Iraq War, or the insurgency in the insurgency after the Iraq War, which is of course
our casualty rates have dropped, not others.
Our casualty, but when there's not like a story every single day coming out about groups of soldiers dying, I think it becomes out of mind. I think people barely notice it. A lot of people don't really notice the presence that we have, or the extent of influence that we have. But what's interesting is that more and more right-wingers are getting fed up with a lot of the intervention. Mm-hmm. I swear to God, I was with my brother-in-law this is probably about a month ago or so. It was before the election. Mm-hmm. We were watching Laura Ingraham, and Laura Ingraham was super conservative. I'm pretty sure that she was very pro-Iraq war. She's a 10 o'clock slot after Sean Hannity. Mm-hmm. And she went on a 10-minute rant about pointless wars and pulling troops out of Afghanistan. It's like, we need to end these pointless wars. And I was like, what? And I was just, my brother-in-law and I were watching this, and we were like, what? This is bizarro world. Like, what's going on right now?
Since when is this a thing? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, shit, I welcome it. Like, if Laura Ingraham wants to join the camp of the anti-war camp, she's welcome, right? Like, everyone is welcome on the anti-war train, if you ask me. You just stop it. All of it.
All are welcome. So we're at well over an hour and a half. Let's stop this episode but let's keep recording for our Patreons, and let's extend the conversation. I want to talk a little bit more about some unadulterated opinions, and maybe a little bit more about this GameStop shit.
Yeah, totally.
But then,
sounds good.
All right. Peace, guys. Oh, wait. Before we end this, make sure that you rate and review the podcast. Really appreciate you guys joining us for another episode. So, as you notice, we kind of went back to our roots a little bit, talking about modern Middle Eastern conflicts. Of course, doing this too because we still want to stay engaged. But we're also going to be bringing you history episodes as well, like we've been doing for the past 5 weeks or so. So more to come on both types of episodes, whether it be modern geopolitics or historical topics. The feedback that we get is good on both, so we'll do both. And to support this show, make sure that you rate and review the show. We are at like 417 reviews, which is awesome. It really helps us grow. And if you want to further support our show, you can support us at Patreon Bro History for as low as $1 a month. We'll get you access to post-show content along with our Slack, where we talk to each other, and it's a fun group. It's a good group in there that we have in our Slack. I think Danny and I get the most out of it because we really do enjoy communicating with you guys. But yeah, we get access to that. It's a fun group, and we will see you on the other side.
Peace.
Peace.